Jeanette Foster had never needed much. Her life in Wexley Green, a quiet village nestled in the hills of North Yorkshire, was simple but full. She lived in a small timber cottage left to her by her grandfather, with a crooked tool shed, a patchy garden, and a dog called Bramble. She spent her mornings repairing furniture in her workshop and her afternoons tending to herbs, carrots, and rhubarb. Most villagers knew Jeanette as dependable, honest, and fiercely private. Then one bright spring morning, everything changed. A sleek black car pulled up to the manor house on the hill, a grand home that had stood empty for months. Jeanette watched from her garden, her gloved hands dusty with compost. Out stepped a woman in designer sunglasses, platform heels, and a coat that sparkled under the sunlight like crushed ice. Felicity Langdon had arrived. Rumor spread like nettles in summer. Felicity was an influencer from London, renting the manor house while recovering from a scandal, as Mrs. Lewis from the post office whispered. She posted videos daily, sharing her vegan smoothies, Pilates routines, and disdain for country living. Her followers adored her dramatic flair. Jeanette, however, quickly became the punchline. It began with a photo. Felicity had taken a snapshot of Jeanette's shed, captioned, "Meet my view, rustic charm or haunted shack." The post went viral. The villagers were polite, but Jeanette felt their side glances. It wasn't just a joke. It was humiliation. Weeks passed. Felicity strutted through the village in silk dresses and stilettos, filming village life as if it was some novelty. She never greeted Jeanette. Once, when Jeanette rode past with a trailer of firewood strapped to her old bicycle, Felicity called out, laughing, "You do realize the 1800s are over, right?" Jeanette didn't reply. She just pedaled harder. Inside her cottage, she worked late into the night, her hands calloused but steady. She crafted benches from discarded church pews, coffee tables from storm-felled oaks, and chairs with spindles as fine as lace. Her online store was quiet but steady. Each month, she sent out parcels to cities across the UK. Then, one evening, a message arrived from a hotelier in Copenhagen. They wanted 30 custom pieces for their new eco-retreat. Jeanette read the message twice, heart thudding. Then she stood, walked outside, and stared up at the manor on the hill. The lights were on, flickering behind silk curtains. Somewhere inside, Felicity was filming another video, perhaps sipping champagne and mocking village folk once more. Jeanette turned back toward her shed. A quiet fire had started in her chest, and it would not go out. The hotel order changed everything. Jeanette rose with the sun and worked long into the night, transforming her shed into a full-fledged workshop. She invested in new tools, hired a retired carpenter named Bill from the next village, and cleared out the ivy-choked storage barn behind her cottage. Within weeks, sawdust and music filled the air. Orders came and went, each piece crafted with care, each one signed discreetly underneath with a small wood-burned JF. The money followed quietly. Jeanette had never been one for extravagance, so she stashed her profits in a savings account and reinvested the rest into materials, finishes, and packaging. She switched to sustainable wood from a Scottish supplier and hired a local web designer to revamp her website. Her humble business, Foster and Grain, grew steadily, unnoticed by most, but respected by every client who received a delivery. Up on the hill, Felicity's world glittered differently. Her videos were more curated than ever, her hair always done, her background staged to look effortlessly chic. But Jeanette noticed the cracks. Once, at the village co-op, she overheard Felicity arguing over an unpaid invoice for catering. Then there was the rumor that one of her sponsors had dropped her. Her followers were still plenty, but her brand had begun to feel tired. One morning in late autumn, a delivery van came to Jeanette's gate. Out stepped a young assistant holding a box. Jeanette signed for it and opened it to find an elegant plaque with gold lettering, Sustainable Interior Maker of the Year, United Kingdom. Her work had been submitted anonymously, the note explained, by a former client. Jeanette stared at the plaque for a long while. Not with pride exactly, but with a quiet affirmation. She didn't post about it. She simply placed it on the shelf behind her workbench and kept building. That evening, as mist rolled down from the fells, she walked into the village pub to collect a parcel. The door creaked open, and as she stepped inside, conversation paused for a moment. Jeanette wasn't the type to go to the pub often. But tonight, people noticed her. "Evening, Jeanette," said old Tommy from the fireside chair. "Heard you've been in the papers." Jeanette raised an eyebrow. "Have I?" He handed her the day's edition of the Northern Journal. There on page 5 was a full-color spread titled, "Crafting with Conscience, the Woman Behind Foster and Grain." Her heart skipped. There was a photo of her, hammer in hand, bramble at her side, her shed glowing behind her like something sacred. She hadn't agreed to this, but she read the article anyway. It spoke of her journey, her craftsmanship, her quiet impact. And nowhere did it mention Felicity or the shed jokes. She tucked the paper under her arm and left quietly. Up at the Manor, Felicity uploaded a story. She was showing off a sponsored kitchen appliance, her smile a little too fixed, her voice just slightly strained. Outside her frame, bills piled on the hallway table, and a final notice for unpaid rent lay unopened. Jeanette, meanwhile, walked home in the dark, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, and a slow smile forming across her face. Winter crept into Wexley Green with a sharpness that made bones ache and windows rattle. Jeanette's cottage, though small and weathered, remained warm with the hum of the wood stove and the scent of beeswax and cedar. Orders didn't slow down. In fact, they grew. Foster and Grain was now listed in a Scandinavian design magazine, and an architect from Edinburgh commissioned a bespoke kitchen table that paid for Jeanette's entire year's rent and then some. But beyond the orders and interviews, something else began to stir. At the co-op, in quiet tones, the villagers spoke of the manor on the hill. Felicity, it seemed, was falling behind on her payments. Her posts had become erratic, one day all smiles and product codes, the next filled with cryptic messages about authenticity and rebuilding. Some speculated she'd been dropped by every sponsor. Others whispered she hadn't paid her rent in months. No one knew for sure. But Jeanette noticed the subtle signs. The hedges around the manor, once trimmed weekly, had grown wild. Parcels were left outside for days. And when Jeanette passed by with Bramble one morning, she saw a for sale sign, half hidden behind the iron gate. She paused. Fitzhenley Manor had always been beyond reach. Built in the late 1700s, it was once the pride of the region, with its 12 bedrooms, formal gardens, and long gravel drive. Jeanette remembered peeking through the gate as a girl, dreaming of walking among the roses. But it was just a child's fantasy then. Not now. 2 days later, she called the estate agent. "Yes," the woman on the line said, surprised. "It's recently gone on the market. Miss Langdon's lease was terminated. It's in probate, technically, but there's a direct route to private purchase." Jeanette asked for a viewing. She arrived wearing her usual boots and wool coat, her clipboard tucked under one arm. The house was cold. It echoed with a strange emptiness, as though the glamour had peeled away and left only dust and forgotten wallpaper. Felicity was not there. Room by room, Jeanette walked in silence. She didn't gush. She didn't take photos. She simply ran her fingers along the window frames, opened shutters, stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the village. It wasn't beauty she saw, it was possibility. In the back garden, she paused at a crumbling greenhouse and envisioned tomatoes, thyme, lavender. Then she turned toward the drawing room, picturing easels and local exhibitions. And in the great hall, music, laughter, and long tables filled with food. She left without saying a word. By the end of that week, Jeanette Foster made an offer. Not loudly. Not publicly. She transferred the deposit, signed the documents, and returned home with her scarf pulled tight and her eyes steady. The village didn't hear about the sale until 3 weeks later, when a discreet line in the local paper read, Fitzhenley Manor acquired by Wexley resident, Ms. J. Foster. Up the hill, Felicity's boxes were already gone. Spring returned to Wexley Green with a quiet flourish. Snowdrops pushed through the thawing earth, lambs bleated in the hills, and the village began to stir with new life. But none of it compared to the hushed excitement that followed one particular envelope, delivered by hand, sealed with dark green wax, and embossed with a simple monogram, JF. It was an invitation. Jeanette Foster was hosting a garden party at Fitzhenley Manor. The villagers stared at the envelopes in disbelief. Jeanette? Throwing a party? At the manor? The news spread quickly, from the bakery to the post office to the parish hall. Rumours bloomed. Would there be music? Champagne? Could it be true that a chef from London had been hired? No one knew quite what to expect. The day arrived with sun warm enough to melt the last of the frost. The iron gates stood open. Strings of fairy lights were woven through the trees. Jazz floated through the air from a live trio set up near the orchard. And there, in the heart of it all, was Jeanette, wearing a long linen dress, her hair tied back, and a quiet smile that seemed both amused and unshakable. She greeted every guest personally. There were no speeches. No fanfare. Just food laid out on long wooden tables, crafted by her own hands, topped with ceramic dishes from local artisans and bouquets of garden flowers. Children ran across the lawn. Elders sat with glasses of wine. The manor no longer looked cold or untouchable. It looked lived in, warm, and alive. Felicity was not invited. She had moved to a rented flat in Harrogate, according to the village grapevine, and her online presence had dwindled to the occasional advertisement for teeth whitening strips. But some said she came that day, driving past slowly, sunglasses on, lingering at the edge of the lane. Watching. If she did, she would have seen a scene that felt nothing like revenge. There was no malice, no gloating. Only joy. The very woman she once mocked stood tall at the center of a community that had, at last, turned fully toward her. Jeanette moved through the garden with effortless grace, refilling glasses, laughing with the butcher's wife, crouching to tie a child's shoelace. At one point, she paused under the old yew tree, watching the sun hit the manor's windows just right. She turned to Bramble, who sat loyally at her feet. "We've done all right, haven't we, old girl?" she whispered, ruffling the dog's ears. And when evening came, and the lanterns lit up like fireflies, someone asked her if she'd do it all again next year. She simply smiled and poured them another glass of elderflower wine. The manor settled into its new rhythm like a song finding its chorus. Weeks passed. Then months. Jeanette transformed the old ballroom into a gallery space for local artists. She opened the conservatory on Sundays for tea and storytelling. Fitzhenley Manor, once silent and stiff, became a place of gathering, laughter, and renewal. But with growth came shadows. It was just past midnight on a rainy Tuesday when the doorbell rang. Jeanette, who had been finishing inventory in the study, paused. Bramble lifted her head, ears perked. Few people visited at that hour, especially not in Wexley Green. She crossed the wide hall, opened the heavy door, and there, under the dripping archway, stood Felicity Langdon. Her hair was damp, her coat clung to her arms like wilted silk, and the light in her eyes flickered with something unreadable. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The wind blew between them like an old secret. "Jeanette," Felicity said finally, voice taut. "I was passing through." Jeanette looked past her. No car. No umbrella. No makeup. "You look lost," she said. "I've made mistakes," Felicity blurted. Everyone turned away. Even the brands. "My agent. I didn't know where else to go." Jeanette didn't soften. Her eyes stayed steady. You mocked this place. You mocked me. Felicity swallowed hard. I did. She shivered. And you? You've turned it into something remarkable. Silence stretched like the night. Then Jeanette opened the door a little wider. Come in out of the rain. Felicity stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking on the stone floor. The warmth of the manor wrapped around her like a truth she hadn't expected. Jeanette led her into the kitchen. It still smelled of thyme and baked apples. She poured 2 cups of tea and said nothing. Felicity sat, eyes darting, the silence heavy but not cruel. I lost myself in the image, she said, almost to herself. I don't even know what's real anymore. Jeanette stirred her tea gently. Then start with something real, she replied. They didn't talk much after that. But when Felicity stood to leave, hours later, she looked different. Still unsure, but humbled. She thanked Jeanette and stepped out into the dawn without asking for anything. Jeanette stood in the doorway long after she left, watching the road curve out of view. That evening, she found an envelope pushed through the letterbox. Inside was a check, not small, not showy, along with a note in sharp handwriting, for the greenhouse restoration. It's time I grew something real. Jeanette read it once. Then she tucked the note into her journal and made no mention of it to anyone. The next morning, she called the builder. The builders arrived just after sunrise. Jeanette stood with her plans rolled under one arm, waiting as lorries trundled up the long gravel drive. The old greenhouse behind Fitzhenley Manor was nothing more than a shell of glass and rusting iron. But Jeanette saw something in it, something fragile, yes, but full of promise. She directed the team with quiet confidence, pointing out where the walls should be reinforced, where the new beams should go, and where the rainwater could be harvested. She had drawn it all herself, every detail, every curve of the new wooden benches, every slanted window. The project took weeks. Each morning she brewed tea for the workers and chatted about the weather and local football scores. By dusk, the air would be thick with the scent of fresh timber and limewash. As the structure took shape, people from the village began to pass by more often, curious, but polite. They asked questions, offered help, even brought pastries and jam jars. Jeanette accepted them with gratitude but always returned to work. Then one afternoon, as the sun lit the glass panes like lanterns, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Clarissa Turner, the head of the village council, standing with a leather-bound folder pressed to her chest. We'd like to nominate you, Clarissa said simply, for the Wexley Green Civic Award. For contribution to community spaces, employment, and cultural engagement. Jeanette blinked. I'm not much for medals. Clarissa smiled. That's exactly why you should have won. Jeanette said nothing for a moment. Then she nodded once. As long as I don't have to make a speech. The greenhouse opened quietly that April. There was no grand ribbon cutting, no television crew. Just villagers, neighbors, schoolchildren, and old friends walking in with soft gasps and gentle laughter. Inside were rows of herbs and tomatoes, reading benches, a seed exchange box, and a notice board titled What We're Growing Next. It wasn't just a greenhouse anymore. It was a place of reflection, growth, and repair. Late one evening, long after the last visitor had left, Jeanette stood alone among the budding basil and string beans. She ran her hand across a smooth beam of timber, remembering the trees it had come from, the hours she'd spent measuring, sanding, correcting. And though she would never admit it aloud, she felt it, the deep, undeniable satisfaction of having built something not just strong, but lasting. Outside, the sky had turned violet. The manor behind her stood proud but peaceful. And somewhere far off, the faint sound of children's laughter echoed from the orchard. Jeanette closed the door gently behind her and switched off the light. The scent of damp soil followed her all the way home. Summer draped Wexley Green in golden light. The hills rippled with wheat, The pub garden overflowed with laughter, and Fitzhenley Manor, once a symbol of distance and class, now sat quietly at the heart of it all. Jeanette had never planned for this. She simply wanted to work with her hands, pay her bills, and keep her head down. Yet slowly, inevitably, her world had grown to include so many more than just Bramble and her tools. The manor had become a place for everyone. Retirees met on Wednesdays for chess and cider. Schoolchildren held planting days in the backfield. Even the vicar stopped by every so often for a quiet chat and a slice of lemon drizzle. Then, one afternoon in late June, Jeanette received a letter. Handwritten, pale blue paper, no return address. She opened it at the kitchen table. Dear Jeanette. This might seem odd, but I wondered if you might spare me a seat at your table. Not for tea. Not for apologies. Just for a place to begin again. Warmly. Felicity. Jeanette folded the letter once, precisely, and placed it beside her cup. That evening, as the sun dipped below the fields, she set 2 plates instead of 1. Nothing extravagant. Roast chicken, new potatoes, runner beans from the garden. A jug of elderflower cordial. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Felicity arrived not in heels or gloss but in worn sandals and a cotton dress. Her hair was tied back simply. Her eyes, once guarded, now looked plainly tired. Jeanette opened the door without a word and gestured toward the kitchen. Felicity stepped inside, pausing for a moment to take in the scent of rosemary and wood smoke. They ate mostly in silence. There was no talk of old grudges, no rehashing of things said or done. Just the clink of cutlery, the scrape of chairs, the hush of summer evening beyond the open windows. Afterwards, Jeanette poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one across the table. Felicity's voice cracked slightly as she said, I don't expect you to forget. Jeanette shook her head gently. It's not about forgetting. It's about what comes next. They sat there until the sky turned from gold to deep indigo. No promises were made. No dramatic revelations spilled. But something shifted, quiet as breath. When Felicity left that night, she paused at the threshold. Thank you, she said. For seeing me. Jeanette simply nodded. You knew where the gate was. And as the gravel crunched beneath retreating footsteps, Jeanette returned to the sink, poured the last of the tea, and let the silence settle around her like a soft, familiar shawl. Outside, the stars began to blink over Wexley Green. Inside, the table was still warm from where 2 women had shared a meal without judgment. Autumn returned with its copper skies and scent of wood smoke, brushing Wexley Green in crisp wind and warm light. Apples ripened on the trees lining Fitzhenley Manor, and the greenhouse overflowed with harvest. Jeanette, wrapped in a thick shawl, moved through it all like someone exactly where she was meant to be. The community had changed. Or perhaps, it had simply revealed what had always been waiting beneath the surface, kindness, resilience, and quiet pride. The manor no longer belonged to just one woman. It belonged to all of them. But still, Jeanette's presence was the heartbeat of it. Then, one day in October, an envelope arrived bearing a royal crest. She opened it in her workshop, fingers dusty with sawdust and varnish. Her breath caught. The invitation was genuine, issued by the Lord Lieutenant on behalf of the Crown. Jeanette Foster was to be awarded a Commonwealth Honour for services to rural development, sustainable craftsmanship, and community restoration. The ceremony would take place at a private reception in London. Her first instinct was to decline. But Clarissa, the village council head, placed a hand on hers that evening in the pub and said, You don't have to go for you. Go for the girls who saw you driving that tractor when they were 6. So, she went. Jeanette wore a navy wool dress she'd sewn herself, simple pearl earrings, and her father's watch. Bramble stayed behind, napping under a tartan blanket at the manor. London was colder than she remembered. But when her name was called and she stepped forward, hair pulled back, boots polished, no one in the room doubted she belonged. She accepted the medal quietly, her hands steady. The applause felt distant, as though it were meant for someone else, someone more polished, more expected. But when the Queen's representative leaned in and whispered, "It's rare to honor someone who grows from the ground up," Jeanette smiled. Afterwards, she returned to Wexley Green without fuss. No interviews. No social media posts. She placed the medal in the kitchen drawer next to old seed packets and a hand-whittled spoon. 1 week later, a plaque appeared beside the manor gate. It was made of reclaimed oak, hand-carved, and fastened without ceremony. It read, "Fitzhenley Manor. Reclaimed. Restored. Rooted. JF." As the last leaves turned amber and the winds picked up again, Jeanette sat beneath the old yew tree, bramble curled at her side. She watched the manor, the orchard, the greenhouse glowing with lamplight, and beyond that, the village she had never left, and never truly lost. She didn't wear a crown. She never needed one. Her roots had always been enough.